The U.S. withholds tens of millions of dollars in aid for Palestinian refugees. But can Palestinian leaders mount an effective response? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the Palestinian people. The White House has once again piled the pressure on the Palestinian people. Following Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he's now cut $65 million earmarked for the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. That money has been described as a lifeline to nearly 5 million people. Why did he do it? Well, Trump tweeted, it's because the Palestinians don't give the US its due respect. The US president was apparently upset over remarks made by Palestinian leaders this week who called on the PLO to end its recognition of Israel. But not all Palestinian politicians are on board, with many saying the statement was unclear. It begs the question, why do Palestinian leaders seem to be struggling to come up with a response? Vanessa Keneally reports.
أنا بقول إنه أوسلو إسرائيل ما ضلش أوسلو ما ضلش أنهت أوسلو أنهتها ولذلك من القرارات التي يجب أن تؤخذ موضوع أوسلو وين نروح وين رايحين.
Strong words that show peace between Israel and Palestine is as elusive as ever. The Palestinian president was speaking at a two-day meeting in Ramallah earlier this week. He was addressing the Palestinian Central Council, which showed it's ready for decisive action.
We assigned the Executive Committee of the Palestine Liberation Organization to suspend the recognition of Israel until it recognizes the state of Palestine along the 1967 borders and revokes the decision to annex East Jerusalem and stopping settlement activity.
But that activity has far from stopped. If anything, Israeli settlers constructing houses in the West Bank are digging in deeper.
We are very positive that there's more building, and this is the direction it should go in. We're very happy that people like President Trump has recognized Jerusalem because this is our land. And there's no confusion whatsoever about that point.
It was that recognition by the American president in December that led to the continuous protests and violence of recent weeks. Donald Trump's decision to move the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, thereby recognizing it as Israel's capital, seems to have shattered any chance of a two-state solution. It's also made a mockery of the Oslo Accords signed in the 1990s, which were meant to lead to the creation of an independent Palestinian state. So what now? Well, the Palestinian Liberation Organization says, with the help of the United Nations, it will find other countries to support its plan of being upgraded from a state to a nation. But many believe the US will use its Security Council veto to block that move. And now the US State Department said its plan to withhold almost half of its funding to help Palestinian refugees. The aid has been a lifeline to more than 5 million people over 7 decades in Lebanon, Jordan and Syria. Trump hinted about his plan to cut funding earlier this month in a tweet which read, "We pay the Palestinians hundreds of millions of dollars a year and get no appreciation or respect." If this aid disappears, millions of Palestinians will miss out on basic education and healthcare, leaving the future of those affected by one of the world's longest continuous conflicts even more uncertain. Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Let's begin our conversation with Daniel Gorevan. He's the Regional Director of Advocacy and Media for the Norwegian Refugee Council in the Middle East, and he joins us from Amman. Daniel, good to talk to you. So, the Trump administration has cut the budget that goes to UNRWA, and this money goes to Palestinian refugees. Is it fair?
In our view, this is a shocking and shameful decision, and the impacts of this decision will be felt across the region and will be devastating. So to give you just one example, in Gaza, 1 million people receive food assistance from UNRWA, 250,000 children receive an education in UNRWA schools. And the US is the biggest donor to UNRWA. The European Union is the second biggest. And these cuts represent 50% decrease in the contributions of the US to UNRWA. So the implications of this decision will be poor people going hungry and children being out of school. But what is truly shocking about the decision is it is driven purely by a political agenda, is a political response to a political problem, but it's poor people that will suffer.
They're pointing out that other nations need to fill the gap because other nations do contribute to UNRWA. Can they fill the gap?
I think they certainly could. In the Norwegian Refugee Council's view, in the first instance, we are calling for the US to reverse this decision. It's within their power to do that, to reverse the decision and fully fund UNRWA once again. Other nations, in the absence of that, should step up into the breach which has been left by US leadership. So we are calling on other donors to fill that gap so that people don't go hungry, so that they have adequate shelter, and so that their kids can go to school.
And for those Americans who would say, I'm a taxpayer, why should these Palestinian refugees be any of my business? If it's Gaza, it's Hamas's problem, or even the Palestinian Authority's problem. If it's a refugee camp in Jordan, it's Jordan's problem. If it's in Lebanon, it's Lebanon's problem. Why does this have anything to do with me?
The US is the world's biggest humanitarian donor. This is a key part of its international policy, is to provide people who are in need of assistance with aid, and they do this across the world, and that is a very positive act of generosity on behalf of the American people. What is deeply concerning with this decision is it is mixing politics with aid. It is anathema for organisations like NRC that the government should decide whether a child gets an education or somebody goes hungry based upon the decisions of their leadership. So we are just asking for consistency from the US government and to avoid this politicised approach which plays with the lives of poor Palestinian people.
You say it's a politicised approach. What is their approach? What is the political motive, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, this is fairly transparent, so it's related to the response to the US decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem and the actions that were taken at the Security Council and the UN General Assembly. So leaving aside the politics of that debate, what is truly shocking is that the actions which have subsequently been taken have been to punish Palestinians who are receiving aid, not making these decisions. They are not represented in the UN General Assembly or at the Security Council. They are just receiving assistance. So I think that this is what is most shocking about the decision by the US administration and why we're calling for the decision to be reversed.
Daniel Gorvan from the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let's open up the debate now and go to Washington, D.C. with Robert Hunter. He's the former White House representative to Arab-Israeli peace talks. In Kuwait, we have Salman Abu Sita. He's the president of a research group called the Palestine Land Society. And in New York, Alan Dershowitz. He's a retired professor at Harvard Law School. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Professor Dershowitz, if I can begin with you. We just heard from the Norwegian Refugee Council, and they're telling us that the decision to cut aid to the UN Relief and Works Agency is shocking and shameful from the Trump administration. What do you think?
Well, it'd be easy to reverse it. All the Palestinian Authority has to do is stop paying the families of terrorists and surviving terrorists who are in jail. Stop inciting terrorism. Stop teaching Jew hatred in the schools. Just comply with the basic principles of humanitarian law and stop inciting and encouraging terrorism. And then I think all Americans would support the kind of humanitarian aid that the United States has been providing. Putting it in context, remember, the only reason there is a refugee problem is because of politics. Israel absorbed 700,000 refugees from Arab countries, and they didn't make a political point of it, whereas the Arab states have created the refugee problem in order to encourage festering hatred for the nation state of the Jewish people. So yes, it's been politicized, but it's been politicized by the Arab countries and by the Palestinians by keeping these people in refugee camps in violation of all humanitarian principles.
Even if the PA was inciting violence within the refugee camps, we have Jan Egeland, the former UN humanitarian chief, who says this is a bad idea. He has a long quote on it. Sweden's UN ambassador, Olof Skog, saying this will be destabilizing for the region. Human Rights Watch saying this is vindictive and a bullying tactic. So let me then ask you, even if it was true, is it worth it making these people living in squalid refugee camps suffer like this?
Well, it's UNRWA and the UN and the Arab countries that make them stay in refugee camps. There's no reason they have to stay in refugee camps. They can be freed from the camps. They can move to Ramallah if they live on the West Bank and have a good life and work hard. It's the Arabs and the Palestinian Authority that keeps them locked up in refugee camps for 70 years now to make a political point. Let's end the refugee issue. Let's not make them refugees anymore and have them absorbed into the West Bank, hopefully into a Palestinian state, when the Palestinians are prepared to sit down with no preconditions, recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people according to the UN division of 1947, and end the entire refugee problem. Let's look at the root of the problem, not at its current symptoms and manifestations, which is very superficial.
Okay, so Salman Abu Sita, all the Arab nations and the Palestinians have to do is what Alan Dershowitz said, and there'll be no refugee problem. What do you think?
The United States helped Palestinian refugees in 1949 not for their humanity purposes, but to protect Israel from the wrath which was created in that time from Israel's ethnic cleansing of 600,000 villages, for which now today there are 8 million refugees who are denied the right to return home. United States paid UNRWA many years before PA or PLO because they wanted to protect Israel from the instability in the region. Let us remember, after Nakba 1948, many governments have been toppled in the Middle East because of the failure to protect the Palestinians from 75 massacres committed by Israel in 1948. And also Israel has taken over the land of Palestinians, which comprises 94% of Israel's area today. So it is not charity, it was to protect Israel from that. And if, for example, the Palestinians are allowed to return according to Resolution 194, which has been in the United Nations agenda affirmed by the United Nations longer than any other resolutions, then the Palestinians do not need any aid from anybody. And that's the only solution which will be lasting. That's why the Palestinians are always claiming and their right to return to their homes, which is taken over by Israel. When your speaker from New York, I think, says that they have absorbed 800,000 Arab Jews to Israel, that's because the same number has been expelled from their homes in Palestine. And 800,000 are less than the number of Palestinian refugees who are expelled from their homes, which are, by the way, still empty today. The Jews are still living in neighborhoods around Tel Aviv and so on. So the answer to all this, there must be an application of international law. The Resolution 194 has been affirmed more than 135 times. And this must be implemented. Otherwise, the instability of the region and the continuity of Israel's ethnic cleansing will cause all the problems. For example, instead of maintaining the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, the answer should be reversal of that ethnic cleansing, at which point there should be no refugees and they don't need aid from anybody. Okay. Let us remember that the aid paid by Israel, by United States to Israel, is 1/10 of what it paid to Russian immigrants to Palestine to live in Palestinian homes. Okay. And the aid given by United States to Israel is 50 times the amount paid to Palestinians.
Okay, and I'm going to get a response from Alan Dershowitz in a moment, but before we get that response, let me bring in Robert Hunter. Mr. Ambassador, as somebody who represented the United States, who was at the table in trying to thread the needle and find a solution, when you see what the Trump administration has done and you add it to the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and planning to move the embassy from Tel Aviv. Are you proud as an American that this is where it's going?
Well, I wouldn't get into business about whether one is proud or not. I think the real question is not what happened 50, 60, 70 years ago. We could argue that all day. It's where do we go from here? And if the objective is to try to enable Israel to live at peace in a secure environment, and for Palestinians to have a state of their own, and to have this problem not be a festering sore, whether right or wrong, elsewhere in the region, then we need to try to get the so-called peace process back on track. The president says he's in favor of that. He wants to do it. He's appointed someone very close to himself, namely his son-in-law, to be the leader. Question is, what the two sides doing helpful or harmful to the process? I think that yes, Jerusalem is going to be the eternal capital of Israel, of course. In the various thinking that's gone on over the years, it can be also the capital of a Palestinian state. No reason that you can't have two capitals in the same city, different parts of the city. Also, cutting off the aid is happening right now, quite frankly, I don't think is useful to the process moving forward. I'm looking at it instrumentally now rather than trying to make moral judgments, because if one does that, then all we will do is violate a basic principle that Winston Churchill once spoke. He said, if we spend the present just arguing about the past, we're going to lose the future.
Okay.
So I would like to see us move on and see the United States play its traditional role, building on resolutions 242 and 338, to try to help everybody get what they need to have and want to have, which is doable.
Okay, so Alan Dershowitz, looking at what's happening right now, we've had the Palestine Central Committee meeting, Palestinian leaders voting to call for the suspension of the recognition of Israel because they feel, listen, the U.S. is no longer a mediator that they can trust. They feel that Netanyahu is in bed with Trump on this issue, and they feel, listen, why bother? Maybe the other side in the Palestinian divide was right all along. Oslo's a waste of time. Negotiating with the Israelis is a waste of time. Trusting the Americans to be an honest broker is a waste of time. Why should we recognize Israel? That can't be helpful, can it? So if what Trump is doing is going to bring about peace, where are we going?
Well, remember, the Israelis offered the Palestinians a state in 2000, 2001. They offered them a state in 2008. They left the Gaza in 2005. And the responses have been intifadas and violence. The Palestinians should come now and sit down and negotiate with no preconditions. I've met with Abbas. I've met with the former Prime Minister Fayyad. We all know what the two-state solution would look like: a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, a Jewish capital in West Jerusalem, a united city, trades of areas where the settlements now occur would remain part of Israel. Palestine would get areas which have a majority dominant Palestinian population. There'd be a symbolic recognition of the right of return with perhaps 50,000 or so returning for family reunification. We all know what the two-state solution will look like. All that's needed now is a willingness to sit down and negotiate. And okay, I do believe that
sorry to interrupt you. Yes, fair enough. You mentioned that East Jerusalem would be the capital of a Palestinian state. Abbas himself confirmed that the Trump administration is saying, no, forget about East Jerusalem. We're going to give you Abu Dis, just around the corner, a little village.
No, that's just not what's going to happen. We all know that where the Palestinian capital will be, it will be in East Jerusalem.
This is what the Trump administration is offering him. Abu Dis, a village around the corner. They're taking East Jerusalem off the table.
That is not true. I can tell you, I know what the process is. I know what the plan is. And we will have an undivided Jerusalem under a plan. And that capital will be wherever the Palestinians want, in the areas under their control. Look, the reality is Ramallah is the capital of the Palestinian authorities, the economic capital, it's the political capital. We're talking about a symbolic capital in Jerusalem. Look, Tel Aviv will remain the central city in Israel, but it's very important to both countries to have capitals in Jerusalem. Let the Palestinians sit down and negotiate. Remember, in the end, the Trump administration won't decide this. This will be decided by the parties. This will be decided by the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. One hopes that perhaps it can extend to Gaza. Right now, Hamas will not recognize Israel, will not sit down and negotiate. So the prospects for peace that would include the Gaza Strip are fairly minimal. But the prospects for peace on the West Bank, people should go and visit Ramallah and see what a Palestinian state could look like. There isn't a single Israeli soldier in Ramallah, not a single Israeli policeman.
Sure, but you still have to go through military checkpoints to get into Ramallah and out of Ramallah.
That's because there
you
is
have to go through Qalandia.
That's because there is a military occupation as a result of continued terrorism. No country would ever end a military occupation while belligerency exists. And remember, Israel is only one of a dozen countries around the world that maintain occupations of this kind, yet it's the only country that receives one-sided condemnation repeatedly from the UN. I was part of the process, a small part of the process, of drafting 242 back in 1967. I worked for Arthur Goldberg, who was then the ambassador to the United Nations. And what was set out there was that Israel would maintain certain areas of the captured lands captured in a defensive war, and that the Palestinians and Arabs would recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. That hasn't happened. I asked Abbas directly, will you say the following words? I recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people, consistent with a 1947 UN resolution declaring two states for two people. And he said, absolutely no. And so the issue is not settlers. The issue is the unwillingness of the Palestinian people to recognize Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. Once that happens, I think we'll see a peace process with compromise on both sides.
Okay, so Salman Abu Sita, before the occupation ends, why don't you just recognize Israel? And it seems as if the PA is moving further and further away from that. That's the argument on the other side. What do you say to that?
Well, I think this is an inverted question. The question is that Israel should recognize Palestine. After all, this Palestine is the land of Palestinians for thousands of years, when just before the settlers from Eastern Europe came to occupy it. Let us remember that in 1948, 94% of the land in Palestine is owned by Palestinians, and only the settlers could manage 6% under the British mandate. Let us be very clear. Let us not play these games. These standard arguments which are floated for some time are now discredited. Let us remember one thing, that Oslo is a hoax, the biggest hoax. Yasser Arafat took a big risk in order to save so much of Palestine. He's proven to be wrong. The two-state solution is also dead end because it's only a cover for more occupation of the West Bank. All these political acts are of no value as compared to the international law. International law should apply first, and political acts of let me just answer the point by Dershowitz when he said United Nations resolution of 1947. He should know, if he studies law enough, he will know that this is only a suggestion. It is not binding. Also, it never said that what is meant was a Jewish state only for Jews as a Jewish state. The words Arab and Jew used by the British to indicate Arab for Palestinians and Jew for the settlers who came from Europe. If you read the chapter 2 and 3 of the partition plan you refer to, you will know that this is absolutely against any racism and any discrimination of one group or another. If you also read history well, you will find that in March 1948, the United Nations and the United States abandoned the partition plan. So Israel has no legitimacy in international law at all. It has been created by force as a colonial project.
Okay.
Let's be clear, you want to end Israel, you're opposed to the two-state solution, you're opposed to the existence of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. Let's be clear what your position is. You're asking Israel to commit political suicide, end its existence as a state. You want there to be 8 million people who claim to be refugees, 700,000 actual refugees, most of whom are no longer living. But you want to bring 8 million people into Israel, turn it into another Islamic fundamentalist state governed by Sharia law. You want to expel all the Jews from Israel. Remember that Jews lived in Israel from
So let's ask the man if he's if he's implying any of that. Okay, let's ask the man if he's implying any of that. Salman Abu Sitta.
This is again.
Don't take his side.
Let me answer that because.
Okay, you've said he's inferred all these things. Let's ask him if he has.
Let me answer that, please. There is so much misinformation here. What we say that Palestinians should return to their homes. This is a fact. This is principle of international law. Whether this place is anywhere under any jurisdiction is not important. And if people live freely in their homeland and the democracy, they can select and elect any country, any system of government they want. But to say that this is a Jewish state and excluding the population of the country is part of the action which created all these hardships and wars, and will remain so until people return to their homes.
Okay, Mr. Abu Sitta, let me come in here. Also, let me come in here, and I apologize. I want to bring Robert Hunter in because we're running out of time. I want him to step back a bit for us. And you've been around the block for a while, sir. Are we close to any reasonable solution anytime soon, or are we very, very far away?
Well, of course, we can continue to have the debate with the two gentlemen you have now, one representing the Palestinians, the other representing Israel. Let me try to bring in what I think is an American perspective. Right now, if I may, right now, chances of solution are zero because you don't have the political will on the two sides. I follow this pretty closely. Resolution 242 did not talk about dividing things up. I've read it. I've been involved in all of this. What we have now is both sides doing things that are not helpful. Yes, Jerusalem will be the capital of Israel. For the United States to say, let us move our embassy from Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, now outside of the peace process, didn't help. The cutting of aid to refugees merely empowers Hamas. There was a chance after Israel got out of Gaza to do things that could have helped the PLO, as it was, within the West Bank, to have a major political role in Hamas, and Israel blocked that along with Egypt. All it did was empower Hamas. What we have to do if we're going to move forward is to say, whether it's the United States or not, there needs to be a basis for doing things which both sides can accept and both sides can find something. They do exist. Professor Dershowitz is absolutely right. You go onto your internet and look up a thing called the Clinton parameters of January 2001. It's all there. The problem is right now, the Trump administration has thrown in its lot totally with Israel.
Okay, and fair enough. And
as a result,
and many would say, I mean, and this is the thing, people will say, you're telling us to Google it. That was 3 US presidents ago. It's a long time ago, just like everybody else is citing the past. Perhaps you're doing the same here. Ambassador Robert Hunter, Alan Dershowitz, and Salman Abu Sitta, I have to move on. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Coming up after the break, why India's newest ID card could cause the poor to go without food and basic services. And TRT World journalist Mok Choy Lin returns to Istanbul after being released from jail in Myanmar. She'll join us in the studio. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Late last year, an 11-year-old girl died from hunger in India's Jharkhand state. Campaigners say her food rations were cut off when her family didn't sign up for an Aadhaar identity card. While the government denies this, the incident has become a rallying cry against an identification program that critics say is a mess. Aadhaar is the world's biggest biometric program. While it's supposed to streamline welfare payments and cut government waste, many poor Indians say they can't afford the application process, and those who are enrolled have new reason to fear identity theft. Shoaib Hassan reports.
It's the biggest data bank of personal ID information in the world. It's called Aadhaar, Hindi for foundation, and contains data on at least 90% of India's 1.3 billion citizens. The government says it's part of an effort to use technology to seamlessly provide social services to its people, especially those living in remote areas. Currently, Aadhaar uses the data to issue ID cards to Indians. The data tagged to them is then linked to other service departments, enabling those with cards to get fuel subsidies, receive rations, open bank accounts, and get a passport. It also allows them to bypass Indian bureaucracy to get instant access to schemes such as retirement benefits or the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee, the largest social service benefit scheme in the country. But critics say there is growing evidence that the data could be stolen and misused. A reporter from India's Tribune newspaper found that the service provided unrestricted access to details for any of the more than 1 billion Aadhaar numbers created in India thus far. That's through a bug in the system settings, which allows you to deactivate the password. The Tribune said they were able to access the data for just 500 rupees, or about $8. The authorities have since launched an investigation, but seem to be targeting the reporter who uncovered the system's vulnerability. That's prompted international groups like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International to criticize Aadhaar, saying it could lead to millions of people being denied access to essential services and benefits in violation of their human rights, and that the government should order an independent investigation into the system. The Unique Identification Authority of India, meanwhile, maintains that its data is safe and any breaches only took place due to a fault of the user. It argues Aadhaar has brought great benefits to Indians. But many are asking, is the cost to privacy too great? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Bangalore is Buddha Chandrasekhar. He's a political strategist for the ruling party, the BJP. And in New Delhi is journalist Shivam Vij, who's a staunch critic of the ID program. Let's try and get to the bottom of this now. Buddha, let me begin with you. This country's biometric database, is it safe and secure?
Yes, it's in a way that, as we are completely digitizing the country and the way we are using the advanced technologies, the answer is yes. Because from last 35 years, we as a taxpayers paid $100,000 as a tax. And most of the tax are not reached the people who supposed to get these benefits. So the current system, the Aadhaar system, is the only way where we can transfer the benefits to the right person and by avoiding the middleman and corruption. So this is the reason, why the government is planning to implement the Aadhaar system in place. And second one, recently, if you see, because they, government is taking the continuous feedback process and they implemented the virtual ID system. So now you don't need to give away your Aadhaar number, and you can straight away, generate a temporary virtual ID, and you can basically do a transaction with that virtual ID for 30 minutes time. So that's the beauty of this system. Second one is, they are planning to create a facial identification system, because there is a lot of loopholes in the existing or previous systems which we used to use. Like example, 130,000 goes to teachers, who never existed in this world, or using all the taxpayers' money.
Okay, so you're tightening it. Okay, fair enough. So let me take that and pose it to Shivam. The government has this work in progress here. It's the best system available. It's safe and secure. Why don't you trust it?
Oh, well, where does one even begin? It's the definition of unsafe and insecure. This is the world's largest biometric database that has already been breached so many times. This whole database access has been bought by a journalist in the black market for less than $10, and they want us to believe it is safe and secure. I mean, that's a joke. It's incredible how the government and the defenders of Aadhaar are in denial of how grave the problem has become. The problem has two parts. One is the idea of biometric identification itself, and secondly, the way the government is implementing it. And both sets of the problem are huge problems, and the Supreme Court of India is currently going through various aspects of this problem, and I hope that Aadhaar is struck down.
Okay, so Buddha, for $8, you can buy people's personal details. People are putting their entire lives into this thing. As you mentioned, it's going to be biometric stuff. It's retinal scans, fingerprints, it's your bank accounts and all of that. And then if somebody, an investigative reporter or somebody else with nefarious intent can come in and bribe somebody, they can buy all your data and have control of your life, right? Who would want to sign up to that?
That's not true, because Aadhaar has three-step process. One is your information, which is publicly available. If you know your voter ID card, you can go and access the details, which you can almost access using Aadhaar. So there is no difference. But the major information, the important information like biometric information, which is completely secure. So I request, if someone feel that, it is hacked, I request them to, get their own fingerprints and show us to the entire world saying that, yeah, hey, here is my fingerprint, and, it got breached. So see, there's a lot of authenticated information, and people are claiming that, they are selling information back and forth, which is not true at all, because it's not possible to break such a system, because, it has a three-step security process in place. And the architecture is completely moving towards the blockchain. So there is no chance that you can break any of the blocks. So there are some leakages on the agency level, which I completely agree. So now government started implementing a tokenized system for every transaction going to happen through the agency. So for every authentication they are going to use, it is going to map it with the agency token number along with the, virtual ID created by the user or the Aadhaar number.
Okay, so you made the argument. Let's ask Shivam. Shivam, here's the thing. He's making an argument. Let me just add to it, right? He's making an argument that it's a good idea. It might have had some crinkles along the way, but allow the government to implement it properly. Are you against the idea itself, or are you against the implementation because it leaves people exposed?
No, I'm against the idea. I'm against the idea itself. He says a three-step process is completely safe. You know that dozens of people have already had money swindled out of their bank accounts thanks to the linking of Aadhaar number with mobile phone numbers and bank account numbers. Dozens, if not hundreds of people. One college student managed to swindle 11 lakh Indian rupees out of somebody's bank account. Aadhaar is already proven to be unsafe. As far as biometrics are concerned, it's really easy to steal them. Fingerprints, you leave your fingerprints in various places, particularly the poor who use thumb impressions in various legal documents. Steal their thumbprints. There have been cases, there have been reports of these private agencies who use Aadhaar verification have been storing the biometrics illegally in their local databases on their computers. State governments are storing biometrics on their databases. So the idea that it's completely safe and secure in one central government database is not true at all. Iris scans. There are high-tech cameras that can capture your iris scans. Now they have brought in facial recognition. So basically there'll be devices in some time which will scan people's faces and through that have all their Aadhaar details. I mean, this is like to hide one lie, they come up with 100 lies. They say the technology is the best, we have no problem, it's doing very well, and then suddenly they bring up something new, something extra, virtual ID, face recognition. If it was all fine, why have you brought in new improvements?
Okay, so, Buddha?
Yes, we need to have improvement in the system. See, best example, even FBI databases got hacked. So it's not that, nothing is hack-proof in this world. So you need to continuously improve the process.
Exactly.
Because see, governance is nothing but improving the services. So basically, if you take the virtual ID, it only lives only for 30 minutes. After that you can't use it, and it is hiding your Aadhaar number. And second thing, I agree to disagree with him, because see, the Aadhaar is not a profile-based authenticated system. It's an identification authenticated system. It means, you can only use it for identification, not to steal any financial related information. You can't steal any financial related information using your Aadhaar.
But Buddha, he says it has been done. He says it has happened.
It's not. I mean, I'm happy if he can come back, with the proofs and, with the FIR filed by the person, who lost the money. I'm so happy, and, we can have
Google,
a
there are
detailed
so
check on
many
that.
FIRs.
Please, sir, please, can you
SIM
please
cards
show
are
me
cloned. Aadhaar is
one of-
used to link to bank accounts.
show me
Random
one.
people call you, say please link your
show me one.
bank account number with your Aadhaar number, and
Please
money
show
is
me one.
gone from your bank account.
I'm happy to see it. Please show
There's
me
so
if
many.
you have
Just
the
Google. It's all there. I mean, it's amazing that
I
you're in
don't-
denial. It's amazing that you're in denial of reality.
I'm not in denial. I'm
Just
not in
Google
denial. I'm in a way that
Just
I don't
Google
need-
Aadhaar bank SIM. Just that. Aadhaar bank SIM money withdrawn. Just Google this much and just see so
Why
many
not?
cases, state after state.
Sir, see, I'm
In
a
Delhi
cyber
NCR, there are some 30 such cases every day.
every day. Okay, can you do one favor? I request
Yes.
this channel tomorrow or within a week. Give him with 1 week's time. Ask him to come back with the FIR along with the.
Well, you guys
and
could
we can
you
have-
guys could get in touch with each
that's
other.
not-
Okay, Buddha, let me ask you a big picture question here. You guys can communicate with each other. If he has any links to send you, he can. Buddha, let me ask you a big picture question. If there are problems with it, and if it can be proven that there are a lot of problems with implementation, would you support maybe the government stepping back for a second and maybe having a bit of a moratorium on this until they sort it out?
See, I have a different concern as a citizen of this country and a taxpayer. See, we gave almost 100,000 billion US dollars, as a tax, and the only 2% taxpayers are in this country. And, we expect that money to straight away reach to the need people, not to the middleman and corrupted and other illegal activity gangs. So as a citizen, I expect this system to be more stronger, and I don't mind even, crossing through 4 or 5 walls to reach my data, because, I want that system to be in place. Like, there are 1.3 billion people, already registered because they trusted the system and they trust the government, and, and people want such kind of systems.
No.
It's like a passport,
They were forced to register. They didn't trust the system. They were forced to register.
Yes, obviously, I'm even happy, if they put more authentication systems. And coming back to the villages, see, we have 650,000 villages in India. Till now, none of them are digitized. So the government already failed from the education perspective, from the healthcare perspective, from the digitization perspective, from the
So
infrastructure
they have not
perspective.
been digitized, but you want to force them to use biometrics. Sir, biometrics authentication with servers needs digitization, it needs electricity. There are villages, they don't have those things. The government infrastructure is not in place. You are, you're running ahead of time that way.
Okay, I'll let that be the final word. Okay, Buddha and Shivam, listen, I wish we could go on. Listen, I apologize, Buddha, and I apologize, Shivam.
Yeah.
I have to move on, but I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
To be honest, every day when we turn up at court, we don't know what's going on. We don't really understand their legal system. We don't understand their language, and nothing is really explained to us.
Last month, TRT World journalist Mok Choy Lin and her crew were released from a prison in Myanmar after serving a 2-month sentence. A court convicted them of illegally flying a drone near the Parliament building in the capital, Naypyidaw. TRT World has always maintained their innocence, and charges connected to 2 other offences were eventually dropped. Well, Choy Lin is now back here in Istanbul and joins me in the studio. It's good to have you back, free, with us. The charges are dropped, but it's been quite the journey. Can you tell me what it felt like at the moment you realized something was going terribly wrong?
I think it was during the interrogation when we knew things were getting really serious. And it wasn't about a drone. They were after us for far more serious offenses. It struck me during the interrogation that they were on a witch hunt against my Muslim fixer. A lot of my interrogation was about him. And, I think they were trying to uncover kind of more serious offenses. I mean, they were kind of digging into his history. They confiscated his phone. They were asking me about my relationship with him. And later on, I mean, we were interrogated for 10 hours that night and then thrown into a cell. And then later on, I found out that they had raided his family's home in Yangon. 25 policemen with guns had gone into his family home. And another 25 policemen had raided my Muslim driver's home. And for 2 nights after that, they interrogated him. And for the next kind of 12 days of remand, they interrogated him about his entire past history. So, you know, and, you know, kind of local public sentiment in Myanmar is kind of radically different from international opinion. And they were branding him as a Muslim terrorist.
Right.
Yeah. So we were really scared about, you know, what kind of charges, you know, they were after us with. And after, you know, the initial first charge, they proceeded to lay 2 more charges on us. And quite honestly, you know, we were in detention for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, I didn't see a single soul. We weren't allowed, you know, I asked the police, can I see someone from my embassy? Can I appoint a lawyer? And they basically ignored me and just threw me back into the cell. And the first people I saw was 2 weeks later at the trial itself. And the Turkish embassy had appointed a lawyer for us, and I met him for the first time 15 minutes before the trial. And we had no idea what was going to happen during the trial. I mean, that day we went into court and we thought we were being charged with this Import Act, and they charged us with an entirely kind of new charge, which we didn't understand. The whole court proceedings were in Burmese. I mean, quite honestly, we were, you know, we had no idea what was going on in those initial 2 weeks.
And were you sort of vacillating between trying to figure out whether this is a genuine misunderstanding from a paranoid state, or whether they were trying to use you and your colleagues as political pawns, maybe?
I don't think it was a misunderstanding at all, yeah. You know, I think they wanted to make a lesson of us, you know, that you can't come to our country and report on, I mean, we were doing a report on Muslims in Myanmar, and we were investigating, you know, the Rakhine crisis as well. So, I mean, you know, now we have the Reuters case, which, you know, so I think they're trying to send a message out to journalists that don't think you can just report on our country. You know, I think they were trying to make an example of us, and I think,
And the fact that you were reporting on the Rohingya, and that you had Muslim members of your team, was it a natural kind of connection for them to make, that you must have nefarious intent and you're trying to undermine their country? Was that what you think their thinking was?
Yeah, I think by virtue of the fact that we were, you know, we were a Turkish broadcaster, and then, you know, we're investigating the Rakhine crisis. And then the fact that, you know, my fixer was Muslim, the driver was Muslim. I mean, I think they came to their own conclusions. And just by you know, their interrogation was not really about the drone, quite honestly, yeah.
Overall, what did you learn about Myanmar throughout this ordeal? From behind bars, in your interactions with them, in the courtroom, what did you take out of the experience?
That you're powerless in the courtroom, that those, you know, it's not about the merits of the case that will determine your sentence. because there are bigger political games being played above. I think, I mean, we got very, very scared in the courtroom because everything was going against us, and we couldn't quite understand why, except that kind of, a higher hand wanted us punished, I think. And, after a while, we realized that, when we were sentenced for 2 months, I asked the lawyer, you told us that we were expecting a fine, but we got 2 months. And he said, because your case is an exception. And by that, I think he meant it's a political case. Right. It's not about the drone. Yeah. And what I've learned about Myanmar, I think Myanmar, there are 2 governments in Myanmar. And, the police and the judiciary, it's under Home Affairs, it's under the military junta. And in a way, it feels like they're still in control of the country. And there's kind of like, to me, a facade of democracy, a facade of civilian rule. And in a way, they're using the civilian government almost to get away with their actions. And it feels to me like they're really in charge as well. So I think, behind bars, we learned a lot about the country and who's really in power. And it's a precarious transition now for Myanmar. I mean, I could easily see it sliding backwards, quite honestly. Right. Yeah.
Mok Choy Lin, it's been great to talk to you. I thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, a special edition of The Newsmakers. Americans from both sides of the aisle join us in Istanbul to debate Donald Trump's first year in office. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.